want to welcome everyone today to our 7th annual residential roundup 2025. We're very excited to have three excellent presenters. Ryan Lundquist will be first, and Dean Worley, Chris Irola last, and then we're going to do a Q&A, so stay through the whole presentation. Feel free to post anything you like to the webinar chat. And, unfortunately, the chat is not going out to everybody else. When you send in a chat, it will go to the presenters and the hosts. So feel free to ask any questions there, and we can post the questions. If they can't address it during their presentation, then we can do it during the Q&A. We're very excited to have Ryan Lundquist first. And really quickly, Ryan Lundquist, residential appraiser, housing market analyst, top-ranked blog, and extremely insightful. I've known Ryan since about 2010, almost 15 years, and his stuff's the best. So we're very excited. We'll hear now from Ryan Lundquist.
Thanks, Ryan.
Hey, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, everyone, you can hear me? You can hear me? Okay, hopefully in the chat you can. Okay, fantastic, good. Hey, thanks, Dean, and thanks, everyone. Well, it's an honor to be here, and I have about 40 minutes here. I might go a little faster, but what I want to do here today is unpack what the local market is doing, but realistically, I think what's happening in Sacramento is going to be really what's happening in a lot of portions of the country. And so I hope you get something out of this regardless of where you are. And actually in the chat, where are you from? Do we have mostly Californians? Different states? Would love to hear. But my presentation is called The Market That Keeps Going. It got a little bit better in 2024 compared to 2023. And so, but really for about 2.5 years, the narrative has been that, the market would be altered and, the Fed is going to slash rates and it's going to change things. And the idea is that a flood of buyers are coming and, this just hasn't materialized, despite all, I think, maybe the hopium that everyone is smoking. We're in a place where I think we've looked at the market and go, it's going to be so awesome, but then why are mortgage rates up right now, right? And so it just sort of persisted to be this market that just feels like it's asleep, but it woke up a little bit more last year. And hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me know your locations. But that's the reality. 2024 looks on 2023. And I think the positive news is that we had a little bit more buyers and a little bit more sellers. And I'm optimistic that we'll see some of that dynamic happen in 2025 also. And so you will get a copy of this presentation from either Mike or Joel. I'll send them a PDF, or you can email me if you want a PDF also. But let's dive into the stats. This is going to move very fast. If you have questions, I'll try to get to them in the chat. But really, when we look at the 10-county region, we had about 18.9 billion in price volume this year, and that's about 1.4 billion more than 2023. And so obviously, some counties are very small, some are much larger, with Sacramento being the largest. But we're in a place, I think, where a lot of people are eyeing prices and going, why haven't prices crashed? It seems like price crash prophecies have been, repackaged every single year. And we're in this place where it feels like the market just keeps going and these prophecies get repackaged. And I think some people lose credibility where we're like, hey, homeboy, you've been saying the same thing for 5 years. And I don't think you're someone that I can trust. Okay. And so, but why haven't prices crashed? Well, here's what we have. This is a median price in blue from 2020 onward, and then housing supply in green. And so we could see this formula, back during the great financial crisis when, prices really tanked. We had simultaneous, this huge spike in housing supply. And what's happened lately, do you see with my cursor, we've had a little bit of an uptick in supply, but it hasn't been enough to cause this, real change in the market in terms of prices. And so we felt very stuck there. And I'll unpack that a little bit more. But when you look at prices locally, here's the median price, change from 2023 to 2024, I would characterize this as very modest growth. Okay, some counties hardly discernible at all. There's one that was lower. Amador has about 500 sales, so let's take that with a grain of salt. But here's sort of median price change over a few decades, and you could see a market that was up, way down during the great financial crisis, and then up. But you can kind of see, for context, 4% is definitely on the lower side of annual growth. And if you wondered, the average sales price shows a very similar dynamic, 4%. Now, there's a lot of metrics. I think Dean, who is presenting, I believe, last, he's probably going to show a price index from John Burns Real Estate Consulting. I think there's a lot of different ways to look at the market. Okay, but here's kind of the way that I see it. And I wonder if you are seeing something similar. Um, where the median price is up compared to last year, but it's down compared to mid 2022. And so we haven't quite gotten back to those peak prices. Now, when I pull comps in neighborhoods, that's kind of what I'm seeing when I see mid 2022 compared to now. Is that what you're seeing also? Someone asked about, yeah, Smoke in the Hopium in Sacramento. That is alive, and it's alive around the country. I'll get to the fires in a little bit. I do have a slide to talk about the FAIR plan, but I think this is the pattern that I'm seeing. And when we back up, though, here's a good way to think about the market with some traditional metrics. When we compare the top category, December of this year, of 2024, with the previous year, we're up about 3 to 4%. When you look at from the peak, we're down about 5%. And when you look at annual stats, like all of 2023 compared with all of 2024, we're up about 3% or so. Okay. And so, but one thing that we want to consider when we look at stats, when we compare to last year, let's just remember, does anyone remember last year? We had near 8% rates. The market got really dull. And do you know what? One thing that we're seeing this year instead is larger homes have sold for about 4 to 5 months in a row. And so that affects the stats. Okay. Just something to consider. What is selling can matter. Okay. But I'd say this: modest appreciation at best. Excuse me. Prices have been pretty flat. Despite what we're seeing, I think, in some of the price stats when we compare to last year, that we're up a bit. It feels very flat. Have you felt that vibe in the chat? Let me know. When you're pulling comps, have you noticed, gosh, there's just not that much price difference between older sales? It's not like 2021 when you pull comps and go, wow, like 10% different, from 2 months ago. And so let me show you some neighborhoods. Here's Arden Manor and flat or coming down. Tiger Lily, thanks so much. Here's Arden Manor from 2019. And so you see how the market goes up? And then over the last couple years, these dots are very, very horizontal. Or antelope, and I know not everyone loves a scatter graph. I'm just going to go show 4 or 5 examples, but you see how, like, it went up for a few years and then very horizontal. Almost every single local neighborhood is showing this dynamic. Or here's a neighborhood in West Sacramento, up, and then do you see these yellow dots? They're, at a very, what looks like a stable level. Okay, here's Southland Park, similar vibe. I'm a one-trick pony, up and then very, very flat. Okay, McEwen condos in Scissors Heights through October, up and then extremely flat. Okay, and so it's sort of like, when you tell the seller there hasn't been that much price growth, if you're a real estate agent on this call today, then I want you to get really used to that, because you're going to need that. Or if we saw prices soften ahead, you especially need that, because it's not looking at the most recent sales and I'm going to, go 15% over that. We don't have that vibe. Okay. And so I'd say some sellers like Uncle Rico, they are living in the past. They're stuck in 2021. And frankly, I think some real estate professionals also are stuck there. And I think 2025 is an excellent opportunity to get unstuck. Tavon, thanks for, I'm glad you got this joke. Does anyone know Uncle Rico, Napoleon Dynamite? Where are my people? Where are my people? But really, we need to recognize that the psyche of buyers has really changed. And here's how I would describe buyers. They're patient, they're picky about getting into contract and staying in contract. They lack urgency to purchase. They're going to be patient for the right property. They're picky about condition, price, location. They're not going to pay top dollar for junk. And, they want to feel like the negotiation is good for them in the transaction. So Matt, throw this football over the mountain. Great Quesadilla, Michelle. Thank you so much. So, but I'd say when we look ahead to 2025, that rates are the real X factor when we think about prices ahead. And rates have ticked up over the last month. And if we go too much higher, that's going to take some demand out of the market. And that could certainly soften prices because it softens affordability. It diminishes that. Now, if rates did go down to 6%, like some people are predicting, then of course, then we can see more demand enter the market. Okay, but we've been in this situation where I think rates have been very stubborn at 7% or higher. And so I think this is the X factor for whether we see very modest growth at best for prices, or if we see some negative and we see prices dip. And so I think that's to be determined. It's what we're going to have to watch throughout the year. But I just say ultimately, we're not in this rocket ship market where the housing market's poised to utterly take off like 2021. We're going to see insane competition, okay? Because we're in a place where, and I think this is a very powerful graph, where we've seen supply grow more than demand. Okay, a good way to think about the market is sellers came back more in 2024 compared to buyers. And so do you see this green line, how it goes up and down throughout the years? Those are active listings. There's a real rhythm to the market. But the black line are closed sales. And do we see how this year, where my cursor is, there's a larger gap than the previous year? And so no wonder why the market has been softer. It hasn't been as competitive as 2023 because we got about 3,500 more listings, okay, than the previous year. But look at 2021. I think a lot of people are stuck here expecting this dynamic where you list a home and then it sells immediately. And so we're in a market today where we don't have that vibe. Okay, now if you look at normal years, it's actually normal to have a lot more listings than sales. I think that we're very much not used to that though. Okay, now how long is it taking to sell? If for those of you on this call who have properties, whether you're a seller or an agent, how long is it taking to get into contract? I want to show you some graphs and then I'd love to kind of hear your take here, but this is days on market in Sacramento. And this is the pre-2020 normal. And so you can see the year starts out January, February, and we start to see the market heat up, which we're experiencing right now. It takes less time to sell. And then for the second half of the year, it takes longer. Okay, now let me show you 2024 on this graph. Do you see the green line? Last month, it took an average of 39 days to sell. And some people would look at that and go, man, something is really wrong with sellers. Look, sellers are definitely overpricing. We do have more price reductions in a normal year. It's nothing too crazy. It's lower than 2022. But do you see how 39 is actually a normal number? Do you know what's not normal? 21 days it took to sell in December 2021. And so do you see how the market is about twice as, I guess we could say twice as slow as 2021, but the vibe is kind of normal though, right? Now, I don't say this to say that the market's normal. I think we're in a place where we have lower supply and lower demand, but it kind of has been feeling normal lately with days on market. Here's a good way to put this. I shared this on my Instagram the other day, where you can see when we compare annual days on market in 10 local counties in 2021 and 2024, it's literally taking twice as long to sell. Okay. But when I show you 2019, I think we're going to see something telling. 2019 was kind of a normal year. And do you see how in 2024, it actually took a little bit less time than 2019? And so we're in this place where I think we've got to come to recognize that that dynamic is gone. We are in a totally different market now. I hope that resonates. But I'd say that the housing market is like a hot pocket taken out of the microwave too early. The temperature's not the same for every property type. And did anyone eat Hot Pockets growing up? I think I had them as a teenager. That sounds totally disgusting as an adult. I can't go there anymore. But the thing is, when you put a Hot Pocket in the microwave, you take it out and a little early, there's some frozen spots. There's some, really hot spots. There's some lukewarm spots. And that's exactly what the market is like. And Lisa says, my son loves it. Robert says, for sure, you are my Hot Pocket people. Thanks, guys. But here's what we're seeing in the region overall. Then I want to show you some neighborhoods. Okay. The really positive news locally, we saw 6.6% more sales happen in 2024. And so do we see this uptick? Now, technically, we could say this is the third lowest year in a few decades. But I think what we have to do is we have to rejoice in the small wins and say more is better. We want a housing market where more buyers and sellers can participate. That's what health looks like. All right, we're still down over 30% from the normal number, but we got 6.6% more last year. Okay, so here's Granite Bay. And this, all the bars in these subsequent graphs, they represent annual sales. And what we can see is that, more from 2023 to 2024, but down about 20% from 2019. Let's compare 2019 since that was sort of a normal-ish year. And so if any neighborhood is only down about 20%, that's actually what doing really good looks like in today's market. Now here's Cameron Park. You could see more compared to last year, but down about 33% from 2019. Kind of a very normal number. The region was down about 34%, so this is keeping in line with the region. Okay, here's Tahoe Park. What do you see with Tahoe Park though? Check this out. Imagine if Tahoe Park was your farm market. Would it make sense? You see a graph like this where it's literally the lowest amount of sales we've seen in Tahoe Park in decades. It did not outpace last year. And so you go, I better expand my horizons. I better become, focus on some other parts of the market. This is exactly why we want to study hot pockets, hotter in Granite Bay compared with Tahoe Park in terms of volume. Okay, Antelope, you can see a little bit more from last year, still down, about 33% or so from 2019. Here's Sun City. Now, what is going on with Sun City, Lincoln? And Roseville looks just like this. Do you see what happened with volume? More compared to last year, but it's actually been very normal. For any onlookers who don't know, this is a 55 plus community in Placer County, and it's been vibrant. This has been, I think, one of the strongest local neighborhoods in terms of volume. And so this is not the vibe in Sacramento County, in Del Webb, Elk Grove, or Sun Country in South Sac. Volume is definitely down there. And so, again, there are hot pockets where buyers are focusing on the market is doing better in some price ranges than others. And speaking of that, above $2 million. What do we notice about volume in 2024 compared to the last few years? Look, the volume was really strong. Now, $2 million and above is a little bit less than 1% of the entire market in the region. Okay, so this is like 99% of the market is not this, but we can recognize that hot pocket dynamic, that there's a hotter spot here at the very highest prices. Okay, condos are having a moment today. Do we see that condos did not outpace last year like the detached market did? And why is that? Well, that really relates to insurance. I'm going to have a slide a little bit later on to unpack that, but we want to recognize that the condo market can be doing something else compared to the detached market. Okay, the fancy word would be, bifurcated market. But here's some really positive news. This last year, we had about 1,150 more sales compared to the previous year, and 97% of that was financed sales from buyers. And so the bulk of sales in 2024, the increase, it wasn't cash. You see this, blue section, just a minor amount. It was financed buyers, and this is 100% exactly what we want to see. Now, each county is going to look different. I'm going to unpack a lot of counties over the next couple months as I give presentations, but I think this is very glowing news. If you work in real estate, share stuff like this. Buyers are finding ways to get it done. Okay, and here's a bigger look at volume. Hopefully everyone's not sleeping, but I have a ton of stuff to share. I'll keep sharing it. But you can look, from last year to this year, that it's hit and miss. Now, almost everywhere is up besides Sutter. I wonder if Sutter, if it's just an outlying area and people are in an inflationary environment, maybe they're less interested. That's, my theory. But otherwise, here's what it looks like. And from 5% up from when looking at 10 counties, And about 1,400 sales when looking at 10 counties. And here are the numbers. By and large, Sacramento had the most growth, and I think that reflects being the largest county as well as having lower prices in El Dorado and Placer. Okay. So are sellers thawing out? The answer is yes. And I think that this is a bright spot in the housing market, something that's happening across the country. The trend is very similar here. And so the red bars are the number of new listings by month in Sacramento in 2024 compared with 2023. It outpaced every single month besides a tie in June. Okay, this is exactly what we want to see. We want to see sellers become a little bit less stuck. Okay, here's a different way to look at it. This green line is sort of the pre-2020 average, from January, through December. And then look at 2023. This was the lowest year in decades for new listings. And then 2024, we had about 3,500 more listings. Technically, we could call it the second lowest year of new listings, but we want to see this direction continue. Okay, we have a lot of people who have low rates. Anyone want to brag? What rate do you have? Let me know in the chat. But this has been the problem where the market this year, where prices went up in a really unaffordable environment because we had about 12,000 fewer sellers that didn't come to the market. And so a lot of people were like, the market is so resilient. And I go, no, I think it's just sellers that have held back. And look at that. Emily's like, boom, 2.6%. Can anyone beat 2.6%? Or especially, does anyone have lower than 2? I'll be super impressed. But never going to give you up. This is my cheesy dad joke. That's exactly what sellers are doing, where they're like, I'm just not going to sell. Okay. And Steve's like, whoa, Emily. Yeah, props to Emily. Darren, 2.9. Love hearing it. But my prediction for 2025 is that we are going to see more sellers thaw out. We'll have nowhere near a normal number of sellers, but I think that we're going to continue to see this trend unless something cataclysmic or unexpected happens, rates really shoot up. We're in the midst of a trend where it looks like 2023 was the bottom for sellers, more in 2024, and we want more in 2025. Okay. Like I said, sellers have come back more than buyers this year, and that's a really important dynamic to watch. If you work in real estate, I want you to use that language with your sellers to get them on the page that it's no longer 2021. All right. Now, buyers, you can see the candy cane stripes each year. We outpaced almost every single month compared to 2023. Now, we could look at it as, well, this was the second worst year of pending contracts. Okay, that's our third worst. But I think we have to take our small wins and rejoice where we can. Okay, Slav says 2%. Let's talk later because you are clearly an expert. But we're still down about 30% from the normal number of pendings, like you can see in the green bars. We're just not going to get back to those levels until affordability really improves. But will buyer demand come back now? And by the way, in the chat, who did you vote for? No, I'm just kidding. Let's not go there. But please don't. A lot of people said, it's after a presidential year, everything's going to get strong. And I want to look at market stats to sort of unpack that to help inform our narrative. These are mortgage rates in blue from 1971 onward. And then the orange bar represents the 1 year after a presidential election. And we could see, mortgage rates don't just do one thing. And so sometimes when people say, hey, rates always go down after an election, it's not true when we look at the stats. All right. Here's the median price in Sacramento from 1990 onward. And you could see the orange bars the year after the election that, an election comes and it doesn't sort of trump, so to speak, pun intended, or it doesn't usurp or take over the trend. It doesn't hijack the market and then cause a new direction. Okay, here's the Freddie Mac price index in Sacramento from 1975 onward. Similar dynamic when we look at many decades, a presidential election doesn't change the trend. Okay, and then if we adjust this for inflation, here's what the graph looks like. Looks way different. Just in case you're going to send me hate mail for not adjusting. But here's where it gets interesting. I want to show you volume. And before you screenshot this and share with clients, let me share the next slide. But you can see it in orange in Sacramento County. These are the number of sales the year after a presidential election compared to the blue line, which is the average. And so it looks like, hey, wow, we really see buyers jump into the market. This looks really encouraging, but let me take out 2005 and 2009. 2005 was a monster year of buyers flooding the market, very abnormal. And 2009 was a monster year because of all the foreclosures that hit. And so when I take out those 2 years, other presidential years, you could see they're actually lower. And so, in short, I think it's hit and miss after a presidential election. There's nothing magical where buyers can all of a sudden afford the market because Trump's in office, unless there's changes to policy, which I would support. I would love to see more buyers participate. I'm just not bullish on the market changing only because there's a new president. Makes sense. Argue with me in the comments if you think differently, but I saw this Mazda Miata in Fair Oaks Village recently, and I just thought it's the perfect meme to say higher for longer, where rates being above 7%, that's making the biggest impact on buyers, and that will have the biggest impact on how the market feels, what prices do, what volume does for the rest of the year. Okay. But what's missing today? This is sobering. You can see that new listings, pendings, and closed sales compared to the pre-2020 norm. Look at this. Like I said, we're missing almost 12,000 new listings and really missing about 9,400 closed sales from the normal trend. Okay, that's very sobering. But and a real estate agent from Guide said this could also be called missing paycheck, and I'm like, hey, a lot of people feel that. It's sort of a market where a lot of people in real estate act like a baller on the social media posts, but you struggle in the DMs when you're talking to people, going, "Man, it's been a tough year." All right, but here's the thing. I want us to know what's missing, but here's the focus. And I think we get to choose what are we going to focus on, the part of the market that's happening or the part of the market that's missing. And I would say focus on the part of the market that's happening. Position yourself to work with the buyers you need to. Hot pockets, think about the parts of the market that are moving. Study the market well so you can position your business in 2025 to be successful. Okay, so this was me in the 90s. First, I used to play water polo. I was super tan, and then this was me senior year of college. And you can see what happened. Well, I went gray. I got old. I don't fit in the pants I used to fit in. But I want to say that speaking of the 90s, we're in a place where the market feels like the 90s. And you look at purchase applications, and they're very similar to where they were around 95. And so if we want to see growth in the housing market, we'll see it first as a leading indicator with the number of buyers entering applications. All right. The number of sales nationally, very similar to 95 levels, and also similar to the great financial crisis. So I'll say 90s vibes and fashion also, right? Have you noticed, ladies, the wider legs, and it's not skinny jeans, all that stuff. But let me not talk about that and get awkward. Notice a lot more mullets too, Steve, if you're still on this call. But it's really about lifestyle buyers, isn't it? And I want to say that if you're in real estate here, or if you're considering a purchase, um, what are you seeing in your book of business, and what are you hearing in your office? Why are people buying today, and why are people selling? I would love to hear a few examples. I'd say that it's about the D's: death, disease, debt, divorce. It could be, having kids, diapers, getting married, diamonds. But, we're in this situation where I think it's those lifestyle issues. It's very hard to move right now because the numbers don't work for so many, but lifestyle will be the motivator. Okay. So when you inherit a property from mom and dad, this is still a really big category in the housing market. And so a lot of properties, I think, feel stale because mom or dad passed away, and then you have a dated home that's hitting the market in a market where buyers are very sensitive about condition. Okay, share of remote workers. Could this change? Who maybe moves to Sacramento or moves away. We see through 2023 that the share of remote workers has decreased, and that's meaningful. We want to watch that. Migration is still happening, and you can see the number one places where Californians, moved: Texas, by far. And these are the top locations. I have like graphs with all the states on them, and people are still going to move to California. I think moving away, we do wonder, will some people move away in light of fires? I think that could be a viable option. I wouldn't think that everyone, but that's something we want to watch. Moving to California, Texas, and the joke is that people are moving back to California. But you could see that, like, there's a lot of migration happening. It's not 2021 levels, but there's still some states that like Tennessee and Virginia and Florida through 2023 at least, where they still had those 2021 migration levels. Okay. Um, so unemployment, what we're seeing here, and by the way, is the chat still working? It's been kind of quiet. Not that anyone needs to say anything. I just want to be sure it works. But one of the things that we're seeing, oh, yep, it does. Okay, people are just quiet and they're listening respectfully. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So here's California and Sacramento, California in black, Sacramento in blue from 1990 onward, the unemployment rate. And so we're seeing an uptick. It's still very small, and this is something that we want to watch. And what I've noticed is that some people list their homes and they have financial carnage, but they don't have to do a short sale or foreclosure because there's enough equity to deal with their situation. Okay, and so we want to watch this. There's definitely people that are struggling. Here's delinquency rates from the California Policy Lab. This is just Sacramento, and you could see that for auto and credit card delinquencies, that there's been an uptick, and we're definitely beyond sort of the pre-2020 level. We're still not 2008, 2009, but we want to watch this because consumers have been juggling inflation, and that's why sort of news of fire insurance potentially going up next year, that's really hard because we think that doesn't help affordability, that it's just sort of one more thing. It's like my kids right now they work out every day, they're bulking, and I'm like, guys, you're bulking in an inflationary environment on my wallet, like, stop. No. No, I want them to get strong, I want them to do their thing, but I think all consumers, we're feeling it in so many different ways. Okay, REO and short sales, they hardly exist today. Look, it's about 0.5% of a smaller number of sales. Okay, and so let your sellers know, let your buyers know, we aren't in this market where we're seeing just tremendous carnage actually hit the market. Okay. Now, these are insurers looking for tiny defects so they can cancel you. And Carmen says closing a short sale today. Absolutely. They do exist. There's just not very many. But insurance is a big deal. And I put out this visual last week after the fires. I think our hearts are, there, we're watching, and it's just devastating to see. But you can see fair plan policies in California just increase exponentially. They basically tripled through 2024. And I think 2025, it's probably not a wild guess to think that this number could go up again. And so I think, in terms of housing, it's a struggle if rates shoot up for everyone. And there's a lot of ideas right now. People are like, it's going to really affect prices. But look, we don't know how much rates are going to go up for insurance. And if they go up a lot, then yeah, that really affects things. That really affects buyers' affordability. We need time to see the trend, though. Okay. But consumers and affordability, I should have taken this out. Sorry, I'm in junior high. I can't help it. But one thing that we're seeing, like, here's the condo market. This is supply for the detached market in black. We've seen an increase, but look at the condo market in blue. And one of the reasons why we're seeing that, the condo market really shoot up with supply is because of insurance. It's not because of fire insurance. It's because associations are being hit with insurance bills for the associations that are sometimes $200,000-$300,000 more than they had budgeted. And so they pass that off to consumers. HOA fees go up, and it's been a problem. Okay. And so this is something to watch. And what I want to say is that we could have different dynamics where prices are declining in condo markets. Here's Woodside Sierra in Sacramento. And I pulled some research a couple months ago, or last month, I guess, and look at the 1-bedroom dots from 2018 onward. We see an increase, but do you see what's happened? There's been a clear, definitive downtrend. And so In a lot of neighborhoods, it's looked very flat, but in some condo or HOA communities, what I'm noticing is downward pressure because that HOA fee is getting higher. Now, maybe lenders are struggling to finance also, but look, last year about 70% of condos were financed. And so I don't think the financing issue is the thing driving it. I think it's more of an HOA thing and an insurance thing with some other layers. Okay. New construction has been bright though. Has anyone represented a buyer with new construction? Um, look at 2024. This is January through November every single year, and I don't have December stats yet, but it's been a glowing year, one of the highest years ever. Okay, and so I think obviously it's concessions that builders are offering to buyers that's making a big difference. And I think that normal sellers, regular sellers in the traditional market, they can take a hint from the sellers, offer a concession, lower the price, do what you have to do to meet buyers where they're at. Okay. Yes, on new construction, Steve, congrats. But look at December 2024. And you can see that 60% of sales went below the list price and only about 28% above. And so I think we look at these numbers and go, man, is there something wrong with the market? That sounds crazy. Like, are things tanking? What's happening? And I want to give you some context. And I'm going to kind of zip through some stuff because I'm nearing the end of my allotted time. But I want to show you that the market in the region, it's nothing like 2021. Look at properties that went above in the lowest category. In 2021, we had about twice as many selling above this same month. Okay. And then way less, selling below. And so I'd say in today's market, it's not like 2021 or here's 2021, lines of buyers, COVID times, 2021 through 2024, it's a different vibe. It's a way different vibe if you're my Breaking Bad people. But it's not 2007 either. And so you look, selling above about 8% in 2007. So I think this market, we compared a lot to 2021 and 2007, but I just want to show you this. Here's the money shot, the money slide. This market today, in terms of competition, it actually feels very normal in terms of the number of properties that are going above and below. Is that a helpful visual? I think this is really powerful. And I pull this visual every single month, and the trend has been very similar for most of the year. Okay, Matt, I will be sending slides out to those who email me, but otherwise, Mike and Joel, the hosts today, will get them to everyone. Okay, or take a screenshot, do what you want, or just send me an email. Isn't that powerful though? So competition actually feels normal. I'm not saying the housing market's normal, but competition kind of feels normal. Okay. So what can we expect for the spring of 2025? Let's start our descent right now to close this thing out. These are new listings throughout the years from 2016 onward. And do you see the yellow boxes? This is the low point every single year. When do listings reach their low point? December. And when do we start to see more listings come? In January. Okay, these are pendings from 2016 onward. When is the lowest month for pendings? Like clockwork? December. When do we start to see more pendings happen? In January. Okay. And thanks, Linda. Appreciate the compliment. And so here's the sort of the pattern for listings, though. I think it's helpful for sellers and maybe even buyers. You can see January picks up, usually higher than November and December, a little bit more in February, but it's not really until March till the market hits its stride. And so we have this frustrating time right now where buyers are like, when is the good stuff coming? And I see agents on their socials going, does anyone have XYZ property in Rockland? Or, do you have this in North Highlands? Here's what my buyer's looking for. Okay, pendings, it's a very similar vibe where January picks up from December. It really hits its stride in March. And then, kind of peaks around May. And then look, it's very steady for a few months and then it falls off in the fall. And so this is the pattern that we want to be looking for. And this is the pattern I expect to see unless we see something atypical with rates. Okay. But multiple offers, we can already see that the market's starting to heat up. Okay. December closed sales, January closed sales so far. And do you see in pendings over the last 2 weeks, do you see the percentage of multiple offers? It's increased just a little bit. That shows that spring hotness in the market. It's not 2021 stuff where these numbers are 60 and 70%, but you can start to see a little bit of change in the numbers. Okay, it's getting hot in here in the words of Nelly. I'm pretty sure he wasn't talking about the housing market, but you get my drift. Okay, the percentage of multiple offers, these are pendings over the past 2 weeks by county. Some counties have very few pendings so far, but you can see, look, the market isn't the same by location. Some of the lowest prices in Sacramento, it's more competitive. You're going to be having more offers at lower price points, specifically, below the median price. All right. What can we expect in terms of prices? Do you see this rhythm to the market where we go up and down depending on, the metric? Usually around February to March, we start to see a little bit of an uptick in prices. Part of it's because larger homes are selling, but it's really because properties in January and February get into contract at a higher level compared to December, and then it shows up in the stats down the road. That's what I expect to see happen. I expect to see a seasonal market ahead, and we'll see what happens for the rest of the year. Like I said, I think what happens with prices, it really depends on what's going on with rates. Okay. But I'd say the last couple things, expect buyer sensitivity about location. Buyers are hypersensitive. And, take this into account when you're pricing a property or pulling comps, that location is a really, really big factor right now. Buyers are simply going to wait for the right property to hit the market. The hottest property on today's market is the one that checks all the boxes, the one that all the buyers are looking for in terms of condition and lot size, the one that's in move-in condition, the one that's upgraded and priced right. That property is going to get a lot of offers. Okay. I'd say expect buyer sensitivity about condition and price. Really hoping that sellers catch up in 2025. Okay. But in closing, I'd say the 2024 housing market was better than 2023. And that's what I expect to see with 2025. I do expect to see a little bit more buyers and a little bit more sellers. And like I said, we want to watch that gap. We've seen the gap of sellers grow more than buyers. If we keep seeing that, prices could be a different story. But here's the thing. It's not healthy for prices to go up forever. What we want to see is a market where buyers and sellers get to participate more. That's what I mean by being better. Okay. And so, and closing unsolicited advice for those that work in real estate. This is my last step. Plan for low volume and low supply, but hopefully more than last year. Have a plan for building a bigger network. If your phone has stopped ringing, if your contact list is not participating in the market, it's time to connect with people. And if you're not busy, then there's no reason why you can't attend 3 or 4 meetings every single week and ask yourself who the gatekeepers are. Get, those who have incentive to buy and sell this year, go after it, build relationship with those people. Don't get high on housing hope. We want to be realistic about the market today, especially as we've really seen prices flatten. We want to communicate that 2025 vibes are not 2021 vibes. Don't be afraid to price below the comps if needed. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe you'll get bid up, or if it looks like the market's lower, like in condos in particular, then maybe it's time to price lower because that's where the market's at. And the last few things, study buyers, sellers, locations, and price ranges to identify where to focus business. Okay, we talked about that hot pocket dynamic. I want you to really dig into that research and go, where are the buyers going? Where is the most competition, the least competition? Where are the opportunities in today's market? Take care of your mental health. Find ways to cultivate joy. I think joy has been really missing in the real estate profession. I can sense it online. And I think people are struggling. And I just think, you know what? There's no reason why you can't have joy in your heart and in your life, no matter what the market's doing. Okay, if we only have joy when the market's up or when volume's robust, I think maybe that's not real joy. That's maybe temporary happiness. Last but not least, be generous and authentic. I think that's what who people are looking to work with this year. When we put the needs of others ahead of our own, when we look out for the interests of those, when we help people make real estate decisions, regardless of what the market's doing, we're going to partner with people this year to help them make lifestyle decisions. So I hope that was helpful. I write about the market once a week on my blog, and I post stuff every day on my socials. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to Joel and Mike who hosted this event yet again. Email me for the slides or you'll get them from them. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time.
Ryan, thank you so much. We always appreciate your insights. Our next presenter will be Dean Worley. He's a principal at Don Burns Real Estate Consulting. I have to read that because I can never remember. He's been in the business over 20 years. done all kinds of stuff, got his PhD from UCLA, and he is the host of the New Home Insights podcast. Dean Worley, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Joel. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope so. Thumbs up. If so, I can only see Ryan and Joel. Now I can only see Ryan. So hopefully my sound is fine. So let me start by sharing my slide deck right here. So there we go. And then flipping it. And then start the slideshow. I should have this ready. And then flipping that. Okay. So hopefully we can see that. Okay. So I'll Joel said what I do, so that's fine. We do a lot of I do market feasibility work. The rest of my company also does these research products and the clientele is builders, developers on one bucket, one side, and then the other side is all the money folks, the hedge funds and the JVs and the land bankers and all that kind of thing. So let's get right into it. I'm going to do kind of a few slides and several different modules. I will go pretty fast through a lot of slides, but like Ryan said, we'll send these out to you. Joel and I think Mike will send these out. I expect everything, if not almost everything, to be sendable. So you'll get this slide deck if you want it. But I'm going to start with some national economic trends and indicators and projections, and then do some kind of national housing and same thing. Then we'll do some regional fundamentals, things like income and jobs and stuff like that, but in the Sacramento MSA, the 4-county MSA. Then we'll do some home buyer and demographics on both the national and local level. And then finally, we'll do kind of a regional housing market. And then I'll wrap it up with some takeaways. If I have time, by the way, my last takeaway is my PhD, by the way, is in political science. So in another life, what I'm going to do is have a slide that has just some thoughts on what we could expect from the second Trump administration in terms of housing policies. So let's start real quick with job growth. Job growth has actually been pretty darn solid. I'm going to move this for a while now. I know, notwithstanding any kind of election rhetoric, actually job growth has been very good for quite some time even after the overhang of the COVID and all the federal money that was pumped into the economy. Job growth has been very, very good for quite some while now. So most economists are expecting some kind of a soft landing, so to speak. Remember back in 2007, people were talking about a soft landing. That was utterly delusional. There was always going to be a very, very hard landing, and that finally happened in August of 2008. So in this time, though, and even the soft idea, the idea of kind of like Ryan kind of alluded to, just sort of a slow and go market for a little while, and we're kind of already in that phase, is likely, as opposed to a recession. So only about 26% of economists, the Wall Street Journal surveys, expect there to be a recession in the next year. That was over 60% as recently as early 2023. So the outlook has gotten a lot more optimistic here in recent times. We are expecting decent job growth going forward. I expect us, we don't do our projections. We don't redo our projections, every month or so. These are a little bit dated now. I think these might have been done. It says October, but they're actually formulated a little before that. I fully expect us to actually increase our job growth expectations, because job growth, since we did this last forecast, has been better. End of year job growth has been very good. So, but still, we're looking at worst case, modest positive job growth going forward. Again, very likely it's going to be a little better than that. We'll see. GDP, by the way, another thing that's been revised. By the way, I apologize ahead of time. Some of these slides, we just haven't updated them. So some of these are actually from like November, October. They're a little dated. This one is one of those that is a little dated. We've actually revised third quarter GDP up to 3.1 from the initial 2.8. And sort of the expectation for 4Q GDP is about something from 2 to 2.7%. Long-term norm is about 2.8%. So again, you can see here the last many quarters now, GDP growth has been decent to very good. Again, it's kind of the situation where our economy is actually a lot better than maybe perceptions out there indicate that it is, or feel that it is. Inflation, though, is something that's getting stickier than folks thought. Again, this 2.3, that's a little dated. The most recent CPI was up to about 2.7 and 2.9, which is that kind of, basket of groceries kind of measure of inflation. The core PCE, which takes out things like fuel and stuff like that, those really volatile parts of price change, that is still at about 2.8%. And that's been popping up here this last couple of months. So that is a concern. And there's a bigger concern about tariffs and immigration and labor force here coming up, depending on policy that comes out of Washington. So we've seen most experts have increased their expectations of future inflation, but sort of tentatively not knowing what's actually going to come out of Trump 2 second administration policy. So we'll see. But inflation has proved a little stickier. Now the Fed is not expected to have the next decrease in their prime rate until the second half of the year. Most economists don't expect a first half 25 Fed decrease. So the expectation is that they will at best stay where they are. So that indicates that interest rates aren't going to be coming down anytime soon, despite what a lot of folks out at the home buyers might think, which I have some data on in just a little bit. Now, national housing and mortgage rate picture, I want to spend a little more time on this. So just in terms of housing, we've seen, as everybody knows what's happening here. This is a national figure. Obviously, the golden handcuffs of those 2.8s and 3.0s and 3.2 mortgage rates have just plummeted listings and existing home sales. We're starting to see listings creep up last year. We're starting to see resales creep up. We expect more of the same going forward. But nationally, you still have this historically very low level. We'd have to go back into the 1990s. We remember a much smaller population and household base before we get to that level of existing home sales. So we still have a very much a constrained resale market nationally and, of course, locally. This measure is called the BHVI, the Burns Home Value Index. Think of it like sort of a Case-Shiller measure where it's same unit kind of a thing. So it's a pretty good measure of true market movement, right? And we right now, year over year, that BHVI measure nationally is about 3.5%. That's pretty solid. It's a little bit lower than the Case-Shiller, as you see over here, and a little bit lower than the National Association of Realtors median price measure. Again, median price doesn't have that kind of same unit, but it's still, it's a pretty solid price gain. And again, obviously, supply has been a huge factor in why prices have been able to do what they've done, even after mortgage rates have remained high and very recently have popped up a little bit here recently. New homes are actually down. Everybody, I'll have a chart here in just 1 second. The new home market share is up against, but that's a denominator effect from the big COVID boom. The new home sales have actually come down a little bit. Those guys are, the new home builders they're doing buy downs. The incentives are completely the norm. If you have anything kind of near standing inventory or near term, you are definitely offering incentives. Increasingly, I mean, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 incentives in some cases when they really need to hit a number at the end of a quarter or something like that. You're seeing some tremendous incentives out there, but incentives in the new home world have become absolutely the norm. For sure, if you're in that market, you should negotiate because they're wheeling and dealing. I mean, they have, they still have to send it to the sales, the VP of sales and whatnot, and get the okay, but they're going to listen to offers right now. The mortgage rates now. This, mortgage rates that are critical to affordability, right? We measure affordability on kind of an index, and the higher, the worse, the lower, the better. The long-term norm by our index measure of affordability, we call it the BAI, the Burns Affordability Index over here in the upper. And it's mostly kind of a housing cost to ratio, kind of a classic measure. So it's not that unusual, but the long-term norm for Sacramento market, I'm sorry, this is a national figure, it's about 33%. We're at 42% nationally. We do expect a little bit of relief as rates come down a little bit and incomes rise, but still, if I had to pick one thing that is the biggest impediment to the market other than handcuffed buyers, it would be affordability. So like Ryan said, again, we do need some time where prices stay flat, even in some places prices maybe come down, to get some more folks into the market, because there are more people than usually who are just simply priced out of the market and they're not in the for sale world at all right now. That's nationally as well as locally. Here's our projection of mortgage rates. I'm not gonna lie, we're pretty good at this, but no one can project mortgage rates with any kind of accuracy because there's so many weird things that happen. So this is this most recent projection of ours, which you see here now, was when we had it done. I think we redid it about 2 months ago or so. Prior to that, all those numbers you see here were like, I don't know, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 lower. We were expecting some more significant easing in mortgage rates going forward. Now we're not. And again, inflation's been sticky. We're not sure what's going to happen with tariffs, which would for sure increase inflation and force the Fed to not just not cut rates, but possibly even raise rates. So we still see, I don't think a lot of that's going to happen, but we still definitely see a world in which we see mortgage rates staying pretty sticky, up there even in a couple of years at 6%. I'll show you some data in just a minute here that shows the disconnect between buyers and actual real world mortgage rates. In fact, let's do it now. So this is it was earlier in 24, earlier this year, I think September or so. So it's not super, that's pretty current for these kind of attitudes, but it's asking folks, these potential home shoppers, I'm sorry, homeowners, what was holding them back right now? You know, what, if anything, is holding you back from buying a home right now? And the number one thing was we're waiting for mortgage rates to decline. Now, some of that is an attempt at market timing kind of a thing. Like we think mortgage rates are going to decline. Some of that, though, let's not forget, is I think folks need mortgage rates to decline. So waiting for mortgage rates to decline was, I wish they would have disentangled this, was both, you know, like, no, I can't buy until they do because that lowers my monthly payment. I need that to happen, or I'm going to wait because I think they're going to. There for sure is both things into that bucket. Notice the next one is a life change. Because life change is what is the biggest thing right now that is getting people into the housing buy market, right? If you have those golden handcuffs, you have to need to move more so than want to move. You had an extra kid, you got divorced, you're a relo, or you're empty nesters now because all the kids left or whatever. It's those kinds of life change things. So a lot of folks are waiting for that to happen. And then look at the third one here. I expect home prices to decline. That's more, it's the market timing. So you have that lack of urgency in the buyer world right now is a big part of that is this expectations game of what they think is going to happen. In terms of, we also asked them, what do you consider to be a long-term historical normal a mortgage rate? And this is just absolutely divorced from reality, because the long-term norm and then that includes the horrific 80s and late 70s through almost all of the 80s, by the way, mortgage rates. So the long-term norm going back to 71 per Freddie Mac is 7.7-ish%. I haven't done it in a couple of months, but it's around 7.7%. It's north of 7.5. The respondents to this thought it was more like 4.5. So it's like, oh no, we know we're not going to get back to those threes, but we'll wait till it gets to 4.5. It's not getting back to 4.5 anytime soon. Maybe not in their home buying lifetimes. We'll see. But again, even that, you never know. Crazy things could happen. So the expectations is certainly a part of that lack of urgency, and it is causing folks to try to time the market a little bit. And then finally, another consumer question is that, you know, what do you think is the highest acceptable mortgage rate that you'd be willing to take on? And look at that, 70% are under 5.5%. So they need mortgage rates to be under 5.5%. You saw a minute ago, we still expect 6.0 in 2027. There is a silver lining to this, though, and that's the actual mortgage rate that new home buyers, at least, are actually paying. And that's this article from Zillow for a little while ago showed that about 45% of new home buyers were actually getting rates below 5%. So that's well low enough to induce folks to get into the market. But again, that's buy downs for the most part, or it's something, or remember also new home buyers as a subset tend to have a little bit better credit, and they tend to get a lower than the national norm kind of a mortgage rate already. And so they qualify, and then that builder is buying them down to 4.99, 5.5, 5.875. Sometimes you see the teaser of that 321 where it's 2.99, 3.99, and then but it'll be 4.99 for the rest of the term. That's a phenomenal rate right now. And so Zillow's data shows that a lot of folks are getting much, much lower than that norm, that nominal number we see in the media, and that I just showed you, as a matter of fact, are getting much lower rates than that. That's how the new home buyers, new home builders, I should say, are selling homes right now. And that's why they have this 15%, this increased and increasing share of the market of total sales. So by the way, if you see something like it says, oh, the new home of homes are 30% of the market, that's for current listings. This is actual sales from the calendar years here. But here's one thing I want to note. This is a normal level. Look at the pre and look at 2000, 2001, 2002 years that I think we agree were kind of normal years before that crazy run up, and not including all all the REOs and stuff like that. And then there's that slow climb up. New home builders as a share were not getting their kind of long-term normal share. And by the way, if you go before 2000, it is similar to this 15%. So this is just new home climbing back up to where they kind of should have been, or at least were long-term, but it's been on the backs of buy downs, and it's been with the resale market heavily constrained. So it remains to be seen what that long-term normal share is going to be, say 2 or 3 years from now, when maybe you have listings at a more normal level. And then this, in terms of a positive, there's no better positive than the $35 trillion of equity that is swimming around out there among homeowners. It's everything. It's why all cash buyers are such a bigger part of the market now. It's why you can, that generational wealth transfer is a big part of those entry-level buyers. I mean, this is just a huge pile of money that folks are sitting on, thanks to how the incredible increase over the last 10 to 20 years to home prices. Now let's look at some regional fundamentals here. So when I say Sacramento MSA, I mean the 4-county Yellow, Placer, Sacramento, and El Dorado County area. So that's what Sacramento is defined as. The East Bay is Contra Costa and Alameda. San Jose is basically Santa Clara County, and San Francisco is funky because it's Marin County, San Mateo, and San Francisco County is the way the census and BLS does it. So, but what this is employment growth compared to some other major markets nationally, and Sacramento has had pretty solid employment growth at sitting at about 1.3%. For a mature economy, that's actually decent employment growth. For new go high growth economies, that's lower. So you see that actually Indianapolis, I'm surprised by that, but you see that in some southern markets like San Antonio, or some high growth markets, well, like Salt Lake City was, or certainly the Carolinas are still growing. Phoenix is growing, Houston's growing. We'll see about some the Florida markets though. Florida is getting hit really, really hard by insurance and hurricanes right now. So their growth has been stunted very recently, and we'll see if they're able to come back to the growth they were enjoying for a lot of years. It's possible they will not. But anyway, but then you see these little more Bay Area markets. That growth has slowed a lot in there, and these are huge. They send out demand to places like Sacramento or even wider areas year after year after year. But job growth there has slowed pretty markedly. We know the tech sector has been hit. AI has helped. Those guys are spending billions, cumulatively, maybe possibly trillions after a while on AI. So we'll see. And then now we have. But then we have the EP ratio, which is employment growth to permits. So think of it as 1.2 is roughly in balance. 1.2, essentially net new jobs, equals about 1 unit of housing demand, of new quote unquote housing demand. And so again, Sacramento is looking pretty solid at about 1.3, but even those places like the East Bay and San Jose, that's how they're able to have decent housing markets right now, despite the economic situations being a little modest right now, or a little bit less than they were, is because their supply conditions are tremendously constrained, especially San Jose. There's just very little new home on the market. The listings are still way down from say 2018 or 19. So it's the constraint has been a huge part of how San Jose has one of the highest year-over-year appreciation rates in the country. And that's because of supply, or lack of supply. And here's job growth. So here's job growth specifically for Sacramento MSA. It's still positive. It's been, we expect it to come in for 24. This is just before, I think we needed 1 more month. So it'll come in at about 1.9%, about not quite 21,000 net new jobs for 24. It's a good, again, for a healthy economy, for a mature economy, it's a really solid number. We do expect, at least right now, slower job growth ahead. We'll see. I suspect we'll increase those numbers here in the not too distant future. So it's like that soft landing kind of idea. And this is general to a lot of MSAs, by the way. This is not just Sacramento. Most MSAs, we expect a little bit slow growth because we expect that kind of soft landing kind of economic scenario nationally. But still, staying positive like this, discount that was COVID. That would mean it's the first that we haven't had a year-over-year negative year since 2011, and that was basically flat. And this, of course, was the GFC. So this is a pretty amazing cycle of good to decent job growth and expecting 3 more years of positive, if more modest job growth is actually pretty impressive. Unemployment is something to think about. It's ticked down from where it was in the summer. You see that here, 5.1, 5.2, down to high 4s, but it's still ticked up from where it was back in the heady days of 2021 and 22. So something to keep an eye on. Nationally, the Fed doesn't have a target like they do for inflation of 2.0%, which is a number, by the way, they pulled out of their ass. And but they do have they don't have a target for unemployment. It's kind of thought of as 5%. That's not official, but most people think that's what they have in mind. When unemployment starts to tick up above 5%, their idea, or what they're supposed to do, is to start thinking more about employment than inflation. So that it's just this crazy balance they have to do between those two indicators. And the employment one gets a little bit of a short shrift because it doesn't have a hard number to appeal to or to anchor to the way inflation does. But if this number starts popping up again, there'll be pressure on the Fed to lower rates, which could help us. And then income is great. Income is phenomenal. Income's been the little thing that people don't realize. So incomes have gone up, yes, and they've gone up higher than the level of inflation. And we expect incomes here to actually pop above what they've been over the last year and be in the range of 3.5% to 4% annually over the next 2 or 3 years. So income growth has been really good. You see all the numbers over here in the far right column. It's been really good since about 2013. We expect it to remain pretty positive going forward. That'll help with that affordability equation. Now, in terms of the demographics of home buyers, I'm going to fly through a little of these here. I apologize. Again, I know you'll get this section for sure. But we've seen fewer families out in the home buying world. We've seen the age of first-time buyers increase. We've seen the age of buyers, period, increase. We've seen more couples out there. We've seen more single females out there in the home buying world. So the demographics are shifting. But the thing is, especially in new home nodes, often the family buyer is sort of overrepresented from the overall market buyer. So keep that in mind for if you're representing a new home or you're involved in the new home sector, is that family buyers are a little more important to a lot of, think Roseville and places like Folsom, places like that. Their share of family buyers is higher than it is nationally or even regionally. So just there's nuance locally, of course, but there's concern. So the share of folks who are the first-time buyers, which is that critical conveyor belt for the move-ups, that's gone down to less than a quarter of the buyers. That's scary. Here it is right here. This is a little bit dated, I know, but that's much lower than the long-term norm. That's not a good sign. That goes back to that affordability, and where we may need some time of very modest change in price, if not some negative change in price. And investors, I mentioned, investors are about 24% of the market. That's a little heightened, but it's not crazy high. Investors have always been a critical part of the market, but they're a little bit higher now. A lot of those folks are Bay Area and they buy here to rent it out. So investor buyers have always been, but right now are even more so a critical part of the market. And of course, I showed you that $35 trillion. Gosh, the all-cash buyers have really zoomed. Again, there were some times there. This is the REO stuff. That's an aberration. That's not going to happen again. This is a relatively high historical level of these all-cash sales going on. That's up at for a time up there at over 30% and currently up over about 28%. That's a big part of the market. That's important. Again, it's also some of those folks, maybe they're moving, retirees moving from the Bay, or just folks moving to the Bay because they can, work from home now or have a territory that encompasses all of Northern California, and they're going out to get a lot more bang for their buck here in Sacramento or wherever, various places. Now back to Sacramento. This is our population growth figures. We have had about this is very modest. We know folks are leaving, but it's still positive. I'm going to say it right now. I think this is going to be upgraded here. We're not going to have 0.7, 0.5. I think the folks who do our projections on the demographics, I think, are a little bit they think everybody's leaving California. And that, as we know, that's kind of turned around the last 3 years, I think, has started to turn. So worst case scenario, modest population growth, more likely, probably a little bit better than that. But still, don't get me wrong. Sacramento is not a super high growth kind of market anymore. It's just not like it was in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. Now in-migration here, let me go to the actual, okay, so this is a slide that shows you the migration, the net migration into the Sacramento MSA, or net between in and out of the Sacramento MSA, and it shows you the green numbers are the markets that are giving us demand, that are sending folks here net. East Bay, San Jose, San Francisco, LA, even Stockton, a move up. And the red are the folks where the net is the reverse. There are more Sacramentans going there than there are coming back in this place. And the two big ones really are Sunny Yuba. We know what's going on there. They're chasing affordability, and Boise. So, and by the way, just because I've done some studies in Boise recently, that is starting to slacken a little bit. That's starting to slow down a little bit. And you find some others. Nashville, Mike's all over that. He's in Tennessee. And I don't know, Mike, you can tell me where that one is. I have no idea. I think that's Nashville. I don't know. And Dallas, the Florida stuff, not really that big of an out-migration, interestingly enough. And Salt Lake, and of course, Vegas as well. And then this is Reno right here. We definitely continue to send folks to Reno more than come back from Reno. So that gives you a sense. But really what it is, it's coastal to inland. And Sacramento is an inland. So if I did this for Stockton or the Inland Empire or something like that, you'd see something similar. Now I'm going to fly through this. I apologize because I want to get to the last one. But again, I'll be able to send you this. This is, we see resale sales volume climbing. Finally, it's finally looking positive here. This is our 24 measure resale sales from its nadir in 2023. We see it climbing here in the next few years as, again, those golden handcuffs just kind of slide away. Every time you see someone buy a new home, they've reset that mortgage rate, and they're no longer anchored by 3.2 or whatever they've just got. So, and then of course, including also that more and more every year, more people are going to, like I said, have the kids move out, get a divorce, get married, have more kids, whatever. So we do see a continue solid increase in resale volumes. We see this is resale pricing. I think I have, let me show you. Here we go. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll show you our projection for price here in just a second in terms, oh, here it is right here. So the BHBI, again, that's essentially a resale. It's not the actual price, but it's how we think the market is going to move. And so you see here, December, by the way, just means the full year, FYI. So we see that being a solid, it was 1.3% for this year in terms of that BHBI. It for sure is going to be higher than that, by the way, I think, when we finalize it, I believe. And they're projecting about 2.5 down here in the lower right, 2.5 to about 4% over the next 3 years, 25 through 27, in terms of that market movement as measured by this index. And so think of it as all home sales. So it's going to be mostly resale. So it's essentially a proxy for resale pricing movement. So we see that being modestly, subtly positive next 3 years. And then here is new home sales, and new home pricing is right here. So here's our new home pricing projections. Again, modest this year, very modest last year, very modest this year. And then we see it popping up a little bit. And what that means is in terms of payments, because as we see this modest price difference, like Ryan said, it's been fairly flat in pricing. This is a new home price. We also project some also modest mortgage rate decreases and some pretty solid income levels increasing. So what it means is we actually see some relief from all looking back to 2024, but also in 25 and 26, we see some relief in terms of the monthly payment, an actual improvement this year, a flat next year. It allows some catch up before it kind of increases again, at least by our projections now in 27. So that's good. That means we'll have some modest gains in affordability and get a few more people into that potential buyer pool. Here's the affordability. I'm going to do this fast because it's terrible. It's at 47%. Long-term norm for Sacramento MSA is, we think, about 37%. It's still the biggest problem out there is affordability. And then our EP ratio is actually, as we looked at, it's pretty solid. We expect it to stay at positive. See that low, so below 1.2, so not great, but still positive. Again, if our job growth is a little better than that, and I suspect it will be, you'll see this number get more toward that 1.2-ish equilibrium, which is a good solid number for any market to have. And remember, we also have a lot of pent-up demand. Look at these numbers over here. Remember, 1.2 is the norm. Look at this. 5.2, 5.4, 4.8. We have years and years and years of this pent-up demand within Sacramento of folks that were not able to buy due to supply or price as well. There's potential for those folks to finally be able to buy prices do moderate here, continue to moderate. I'll give you this. I think I'm almost out of time, but what I'm going to do real quick, give me 2 minutes. I'll just, for Trump, second Trump administration, I call it Trump to Electric Boogaloo because every sequel should have Electric Boogaloo as the subtitle. Just I believe that very strongly. So there are some positives that could come up from a Trump 2 administration. You can see some regulatory relief, like people are talking about some of those energy efficiency mandates. They might be eased back in terms of home building. You might see more sales of federal land and more use of public land for development with the Trump second administration. You might see, the problem is, of course, that the Fed has few tools that it can use to impact like cities. And that's where a lot of, in California, the antagonism toward growth is mostly at the city level. It's not at the state level anymore. The state is very pro-growth in housing. The cities, though, remain very NIMBY. And there's not a ton that the federal government can do, but to the degree there is, will they withhold funds or something like that? We don't know yet. But there are maybe some carrots and sticks that the federal government can do to try to induce those localities, those local jurisdictions to be a little more positive toward growth. I will expect to be more opportunity zones because Scott Turner, he is the Secretary of Housing nominee from Trump. And he used to be a lobbyist for the opportunity zone for that industry, I guess. So I would expect more opportunity zones just given his background. And but again, there's limited means of what they can do. And then the less positive stuff, we know what those are. Those are immigration and tariffs. Tariffs obviously would directly lead, unless they're really fine and specific, like the way tariffs were against Chinese, some computer parts against China that didn't prove to have any kind of impact on inflation, really, for the most part, unless they're really fine. But so far, Trump's said things like just across the board, Mexico, Canada, and China kinds of tariffs. Those things would, for sure, of course, cause inflation to go up, and therefore mortgage rates will probably have to either stay where they are or go up. And then immigration is not just it is both the lower income immigration, because we need that for a labor force, especially in construction, by the way. There's no getting around it. A huge part of the construction force is immigrant force. It would certainly increase cost for builders if immigration was really, really strongly stifled, or if there's mass deportations, which are logistically impossible. But the other one is, of course, the H-1B. We've seen a lot of buzz about that between Musk and between some of the other folks within the Trump camp. There's going to be a battle for H-1B, and that, of course, has a direct impact on these Bay Area markets, any market that is tech heavy, or even, by the way, other sectors too, like finance. So any of those, and that's more move up type of home purchases. So H-1B policies, however they turn out, who's going to win that battle will have a big impact. And if they are severely constrained, if that side wins, that would have a definite negative impact on housing policy in a lot of different markets across the country, and certainly in Northern California. And of course, again, inflation. The other thing, just generally, I put down here is unpredictability, because we just don't know what's going to happen. And how, ironically, weirdly, because Trump is from the real estate sector, he's never seemed to have a real focus on housing policy, oddly enough. So we don't know. Who's he going to put in charge of the HFA, things like that? We just don't know. Will they ease back on things like the Dodd-Frank stuff and allow more funky mortgages to happen, which we already played that tune in 2003, 4, and 5. We saw what happened in 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we don't know what's going to happen. There's a degree of unpredictability to the future in terms of housing policies. But if the tariffs thing and the immigrant thing is more rhetoric than reality, I think overall it could be net positive for housing, but we'll see. And I think I will stop sharing now. Oh, great. Oh, here's my, can I show that? Is this,
please do.
If you want to, that's my contact info. I don't know if it works. I just did this at a BIA speech, and 2 or 3 people said it didn't work, but everybody else said it did. So I hope it does. It's the QR code thing. I don't know. And so if you want to take a picture of that, whatever. But again, Joel, I'll send you these slides, and I expect almost all of them, if not all, to be able to be sent out.
Thank you, Dean. That was wonderful. That was great. I learned a lot. I love all the national stuff as well as local and regional. So thank you very much.
Happy to do it.
Our next presenter will be Chris Irola. He is the CEO of Rent Pros Property Management, been in property management for 34 years. started the California Landlords Association to be able to help out landlords. And I love that he keeps a finger on like what's going on in policy and politics relating to land owners, that is owners, property management, renting of houses, etc. Chris, take it away.
Okay. I don't see myself. Do you see me?
I don't see you yet.
How do I do that?
Turn on your video.
I was there. You cannot stop or start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, really? Okay, hold on a moment.
It's on you, buddy. Help.
Ready, try that.
Voila. Okay.
There you
There you go. Okay, Joel. Great. Well, thanks for that introduction, and thanks for having me and doing this every this you said 7 years, Joel. Yeah, it's I know it's a lot of work, and we all appreciate it. Well, hey, I want to start by talking about there we go. About two trends that I see in California, and I'll start by this. I'll say, California voters got it right. We had, and I'm not talking about the presidential election. I don't know if you can see these, but presidential election. I'm talking about two voter initiatives that California's had on the ballot that had a potential great impact on the housing industry. Unfortunately, they both went the right way. Just the 30-second summary of each. Proposition 33 was essentially an expansion of rent control, and that bill failed. That bill failed. We are not going to have an expansion of rent control. The summary is, back in the 60s when rent control started, rent control included all kinds of properties, all residential homes, apartment buildings, even went into the commercial end of things and controlled rents and controlled a whole lot of other regulations having to do with those types of properties. It was about 15 years later, the mid-'80s, 20 years later, mid-'80s, when a couple of legislators, one last name Costa, the other one last name Hawkins, and they got together. One was a Democrat, one was a Republican, and they got together and decided to fix what the rent control had destroyed. And what happened is, after rent control, they found that there was very little construction going on. I mean, how could you build when an apartment building when the government was going to control your rent amounts, and why would you fix up your property and do remodels and such when you can't increase the rent? So communities became blighted, especially if you think back, if you saw Berkeley in the 70s. Some of these cities that were heavily impacted by rent control became very blighted. And so Costa and Hawkins got together and they said, we're going to fix this. And they wrote a bill called the Costa-Hawkins bill, and it essentially insulated certain properties. For example, single-family homes were no longer subject to rent control. Commercial properties no longer subject to rent control. Properties that were built new for the first 50, that is multifamily properties built new, were no longer subject to rent control for the first 13 years. Well, immediately things got better. Buildings started. Property owners could fix up their rentals, provide a better quality of a product for their tenants. And then Proposition 33 comes along 40 years later and says, no, let's go back to the 60s and let's go ahead and make this include all properties, essentially all properties under rent control. And the voters said no. Okay, great. I'm not sure they had that level of knowledge, but for whatever reason, this failed, and that's good for the rental home industry. The other proposition that did a lot of good for the housing industry is Proposition 34. I voted on this, and frankly, I think I voted wrong. I didn't quite understand it. This had to do with the financing of political campaigns and proposition campaigns, either fighting for or against, by nonprofit organizations. In other words, a nonprofit, specifically the target here was the California AIDS Foundation, because they collect, they're one of other many charities who were collecting literally tens of millions of dollars and millions of dollars in taxpayer funds. And instead of using those funds for what people thought they were going to be used for, they were funding campaign candidate for the candidates that the CEO favored. They were promoting certain, well, Proposition 10, for example, rent control back in 2020. And this Proposition 34 simply said, look, if you're going to stand up there and pose to be a group that's going to fight for AIDS or whatever, then the money you collect, 80% of it has to be spent on that cause. So it's a pretty common sense decision, but the way it was written was a little confusing, but thank God that passed. So now these institutions who we in the housing industry, frankly, have been butting heads with for many years, decades actually, those guys are going to be calmed down a little bit, or they should be, because they're not able to just take the amount of funds that they've been using and apply it towards causes that were not what people thought. So well, let's take a look at the single family rental housing industry. Now, this is a segment of the housing industry that is not very well documented. It's not at all like sales. We don't have an MLS, so we don't have statistics out there, and we can make a lot of charts. It's not even like the multifamily world, where apartments are actually tracked fairly well, and you can get a lot of data, and most data you look at is for multifamily housing. So when we try to look at trends in the single family realm, it's a little more difficult, but we can still glean some things here. I want to talk about the rise in corporate ownership of single family homes. I don't know if you remember, about 15 years ago, well, it was after 2010, William Buffett said, look, you know, what I'd really like to do is go out and buy 100,000 single family homes, but I'm not going to do it. Well, others followed and did that. And starting around actually 2008 and 2010, we started to see this corporate ownership of single family homes. You've heard of Blackstone. Traditionally, large corporations invested in multifamily, but they started investing in single family homes, and that trend has continued. Right now, you have about 80 million homes, 80 million detached single family homes in the United States. The homes you and I live in, the homes that are rentals, but about 1/4 of those are rentals. So about 20 million single family detached single family homes in America are rentals. Now, corporate ownership only represents currently about 2% of those. And you're thinking, well, that's not much of a trend, is it? Why are we talking about it? Well, we have this group, we call them the Big Five, because these are the 5 largest corporations who have been out purchasing single family homes in the United States. They currently own about 320,000 homes in the United States. And you think, well, you know, that's a lot of homes, but it's still only 2% of the homes out there. The names of these corporations, I've never heard of a couple of these, but you know, we're most familiar with Invitation Homes because they're pretty active here in the Sacramento area, owning more than 3,200 homes. So why is this a trend? Well, here's why I call it a trend. Because when we do track, starting in 2020, this graph starts in 2020, goes for 3 years, ends in 2023, we see that there's a pretty big uptick in the inventory owned by these large institutions. This bottom line is the yellow line. The yellow line, yeah, it's a yellow line. It represents the national average. And so on a whole, these corporations have increased their holdings by 24% in just 3 years. So that means every 4 years, if that continues, they'll be doubling their inventory. Look at an area like Tampa, this top blue line up here. Okay, 44% increase in inventory over 3 years. So that's a pretty big buying spree. And you still think, well, Chris, it's only 2%. Come on, who cares? Well, here's why we care. Here's why we care about it. Economists, government economists, analysts, private economists, when you look at what these people are saying and looking at corporate intentions, they're saying that by 2030, in just 5 years, they predict that 46%, that's almost half, 46% of non-owner occupied single-family residences that are rentals in the US will be corporate owned. Now, if that really happens, that's gonna be big. Why is it gonna be big? Why is it gonna have an impact on us? Well, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta published a study about corporate landlords that we've all known for a long time, and that study shows that corporate ownership, corporate landlords are a lot different than what we call mom and pop or small investor landlords. And that is mainly corporate landlords tend to increase the rent more often. And I've had some personal experiences with the Invitation Homes, especially when they first came to Sacramento. And yes, I can tell you for sure that was a big push. Get the highest rent, get the highest rent, that was like a main focus. These tend to be short-term owners. That is, they're going to get into a market, they're going to increase their cash flows and either sell those properties or keep them together and take the corporation public. The study also revealed that these institutions are far likelier to evict a tenant when things go wrong. We've seen the next one quite a bit, and that is where these institutions tend to violate fair housing laws and other local ordinances far more than, say, mom and pops. All you have to do is go look at the ads of some of the vacancy lists and look at how they advertise some of their homes, and you can spot fair housing violations throughout many of those listings. They tend to perform less maintenance. They cut back on services, things like parking, storage, payment methods, that kind of thing. And so overall, tenant advocate organizations like Tenants Together and California Tenant Association have been increasing their complaints against these types of landlords, and Tenants Together set out a statement saying that institutional landlords are attacking us in every way possible. So in response, our legislators have started making more and more rules, passing more and more laws, and some of those now are targeted not towards the mom and pops, but targeted towards these large institutional owners. Our local effect, well, so how does that affect us here locally in Sacramento in terms of the rental market? Well, as I said earlier, Invitation Homes has about more than 3,200 homes in the greater Sacramento areas, 32 single-family homes, 3,200 single-family homes. So that's significant. I mean, when you look out there and you see homes for rent, a significant number of vacancies are frankly, Invitation Homes. And so how does that affect us? Well, here's one way. When a property manager like myself or just an individual rental owner wants to sort of figure out how much should I charge for rent, we go to places like Zillow and Rentometer, and we look at what's out there. We look at how many days it's been on the market, what they're asking, what it is. And typically, we are seeing, we might think, oh, I'm going to price this home at $1,800, $1,900. And we'll see these institutions pricing their home in the same area for $150, $200 more, and they're getting it. So our natural response then, of course, is to follow suit, right? So you'll see rent increases happening. I know they've been an influence. This situation has happened in my company, and this has been an influence in some of our pricing. And why not? I mean, we have landlords too. They have expenses. They have all the taxes, insurance, utilities that everybody else does. So, and frankly, the more rent they can get, well, the better off it is. Most of my mom and pop owners, most of my owners are not mom and pop. They own 1 or 2 rentals, and this is their retirement. And they're hoping to retire on the income, the residual income from those homes. Let's look at an area like Fresno that has almost no Invitation Homes, as far as I can read, owns nothing in Fresno. So there it's going to have very little impact. Look at the Bay Area, the East Bay specifically. Invitation Homes has concentrated most of their holdings in the East Bay. They have about 1,600 single family rental residences in the San Francisco East Bay. Is that going to create an impact? Probably. As big as we see in Sacramento? Probably not. So that's what we're seeing locally here. And I blew this up just in case you want to get the slides from Joel and Mike. I just think this is kind of an important trend that we're seeing, that we should watch and make changes based on what we see. So as a small investor myself and manager of many small investors, we say, well, why are we going to follow this trend? Why do we care what these big guys are doing? Okay, we get more rents, all right. But what if we want to go out and buy some more properties? When we're thinking about where to buy, what kind of property to buy, I know a lot of people are fleeing the state. A lot of people are getting out of single family homes and going into other types of properties. Well, I'm maybe a contrarian there, but just like when I go to buy a stock, I want to see what the CEOs are doing. Are the CEOs buying their own stock, selling their own stock? What's Buffett doing? And I'm kind of a copycat, and I think that's, proudly so. I mean, follow the leader, right, guys? I mean, these large corporations have staffs of analysts, attorneys, lobbyists, and they know what's going on, and they're setting the trends. So yeah, I say it's good to know a trend like this, because if you're out there and you want to purchase a rental property, the barrier to entry is lowest generally on a single family home, and I think you'll do quite well if you pay attention to what the big guys are doing and follow their trend. Off to the right here, also, I view this, the big five are going to protect their position. In other words, we've had some bills pass the legislature and not get signed by the governor. We've had many bills introduced that didn't make it. And a lot of it is because these big five are spending money on lobbyists and getting their way down at the legislature. And so they're kind of running protection for themselves. And my thought is, if you jump on that bandwagon, they're going to run protection for you just by default, right? If you both have the same investment and they're fighting for these particular provisions, then and you have the same product, you're going to do, I think well. Now there's a big caution. I mentioned that we're getting a tremendous amount of legislation introduced in California recently. And I say recently, I mean the past 10, 15 years, tremendous amount more than we used to get. So that means you better know and follow these rules really well. And you better follow the rules more closely than, say, these big corporates. And I mentioned earlier, we see rule violations, and we see the big guys get caught in that sometimes, and they get sued and they go to court and they have to pay a $10,000 or $20,000 fine and maybe some retribution to the tenant. Well, that's okay for them because these are multi-billion-dollar companies, but that's not going to be okay for you or me as a small-time investor. So we have to be extremely careful to follow these rules, not give the wrong notice, not neglect to give the correct notice. You know, penalties for giving the wrong notice can be $25,000 in some cases. And by not doing certain things, landlords can inadvertently become a felon, oddly enough, for some incorrect practices. So you got to know those rules and then follow the leader. And I think that's the way to go. Okay, well, speaking of legislative bills, let's talk about the second trend that I'm seeing here in California, and that is this onslaught of legislative activity. I can recall the days when I belonged to a group called the Rental Housing Association, a part of the California Landlord Association, and we would have to go down once a year for our legal updates, and then maybe literally one or two new rules that we had to learn and pay attention to. In 2024, there were more than 3,000 bills introduced into our legislature, and 1,200 of those bills were actually signed into law. Now, the California Apartment Association, they watch all of these incoming and proposed bills, and they deem that 126 of those bills were directly or indirectly related to the housing industry. So they went to bat to fight for or against these initiatives. In the end, there were 64 new laws signed into effect that affect housing. So how in the world are you going to keep up with 64 new laws this year? In 2020, I think we had more than 100 new laws introduced that had to do with housing, and not introduced, passed. So how are you going to possibly keep up with this? Well, the DIY, the do-it-yourself days, those are kind of over for landlords, or at least they should be. If you're going to own property, you need one or two things or both. You need a really good property manager who knows the rules and stays up on them, or you need a really good attorney who you can tap into whenever you need. The best scenario is to have both, right? In my company, for example, we spend an awful lot of time learning these new rules. We're still learning about these 64 rules. And then we have an attorney who we are consulting with almost daily. In fact, I just spent the weekend with my attorney up in the hills. We have a property up there. We went and hung out and just went over a lot of these rules, reading the bills themselves, trying to figure out what they say. That's the responsibility of a homeowner now, whether you're an individual owner or a property management company or a real estate agent. A real estate agent's managing property. Well, if you're going through this process, great. If you're not, well, I suggest that you pass this off to a property manager. There's a bunch of new laws that we can talk about, but there's two that I want to just briefly describe. Assembly Bill 2347 gave us, well, if you thought evictions, 6 months to evict somebody was a long time, well, hang on to your hats, Grandpa. It's going to be longer now. And not only did this a 10-day extension time for tenants to respond once they've been served with an eviction, but also there's a bunch of provisions now for tenants' rights to have a free attorney paid for by you and me. It goes on and on, but evictions are going to be tougher. It's another bill that passed 2801 that affects all landlords. Is the new security deposit photo requirements, and that is if you're going to take a deposit from a tenant, which there's legislation been proposed to stop us from doing that, but right now we can take a security deposit, and you later want to charge the tenant for damages that they caused, and you want to bill them to that security deposit before you want to take some and pay for those damages out of the deposit. You have photo requirements. You got to take photos of the property before they move in, after they move out, and after you make repairs. So in my company, we take about 300 photos on a move-in inspection, about 300 photos on a move-out inspection, and 300 photos on the next move-in inspection. So we have about 900 photos by the time we've completed one cycle. And what we are planning to do, because this bill, it takes effect, I think, April 1st or April 25th or so, we're just going to send they're going to send 800 to 1,000 photos to our tenants. when we want to withhold funds to pay for repairs. If you're not going to do that, then you can't use their deposit. You got to give their whole deposit back. If you're not going to go through that process, then don't hold any security deposits. Because if you do and you don't go through the process, there's fines for that. Not just, oh, you owe the deposit back, but you could owe a lot more than that. So there's other rules we have to report in certain cases. We have to report positive payment reports. Can't report the negative. If they miss a payment or pay late, can't report that, but you can be required to report the good news. Tenant screening rules, that's changed a lot. Domestic violence protections have expanded. There's been a rule around if you own a property, multifamily, single family, and you have a balcony, that balcony has to be inspected for dry rot. As you may know, we've had some incidences in our area where there's actually been a couple of deaths from balconies collapsing and on people. And so that deadline has been extended. But if you have a balcony, call one of these companies that's certified to inspect balconies, get them out there and inspect that balcony ASAP. All of my properties have been inspected. All repairs were made months and months and months ago. It's just a matter of a phone call. So make sure you do that. Few bills that didn't pass before we close up here. Well, you know, there was Assembly Bill 1786 was proposed to declare climate change a state of emergency. And you say, how does that affect housing? Well, right now we have fires going on in LA, don't we? And what did our Attorney General Bustamante do? He declared a state of emergency. The state of emergency gives special privileges to the governor and the legislators to do a lot of things that they normally could not do. In fact, when it comes to housing, they can, and in fact, we saw this in COVID where they said, well, you know, you can only raise rents a small amount or not at all in some cases. And there were many cases where rents were not allowed to be increased. There also came a time when they said no evictions. Tenant doesn't pay, you still cannot evict them. So during COVID, we had tenants that, you know, went for over 2 years in some cases. Many of them went a year and a half. They didn't pay any rent and we could not evict them. And there's the owner making payments and repairs and all that. So to declare climate change a permanent state of emergency would mean that the governor could come in and say, no more evictions, or you can never raise rent again, or and so on and so on. Fortunately, this was defeated. This bill was defeated. I'm sure that the big five, especially Invitation Homes here in California, I'm sure they contributed to that. I know that they contributed $7 million to defeat Proposition 10, the rent control initiative, which had a significant impact on making sure that that bill or that initiative did not pass. There was another proposal, Assembly Bill 2216, to ban pet policies, restrictions, meaning no more saying no pets. You put your property up for rent, you have to accept a pet. There's some restrictions and size restrictions and things like that, but no longer could anyone say, no pets. Well, that bill did not pass. That did not make it actually to the governor's desk. Now, I wrote up here at the top, bills that did not pass, but stay tuned. I say that because in my 30 years of following these proposals and defeats of the I've seen these kind of things come back, return again until they finally pass in some form. Once they pass, then the next step is to expand them. So who knows? But for right now, these bills, these did not make it. Hey, got through that kind of, I hope, on time, Joel. I want to thank Joel and Mike for putting on this presentation. I know it's a lot of work. It's a few bucks and takes a lot of time and stressful and all that. So kudos to you guys and thanks again.
Chris, thank you so much. That was very informative. I learned a lot and I'm looking forward to talking to you more about these in the future. Let's ask Ryan and Mike to turn on their...
Can't turn it on. You've got me blocked.
Joel does that.
There you go.
I don't know why it does that. I guess I'm special. Ryan, is your mic on? There it is. Perfect. Okay, let's do a Q&A. People can type into the chat for any questions they may have for anybody. I don't have any particular questions. Huge amount of information. I think one of the things that I just wanted to see if Chris and Ryan had any thoughts on is start with affordability. Like Dean mentioned that we're at pretty unaffordable, what, the 41% when the normal is like 32% of income. And, obviously people are waiting for rates to go down, but Ryan, I'd love to hear your take on it. What you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we really need a metric to tell us that we're struggling with affordability, but in addition to what Dean was sharing, I pay attention to the California Association of Realtors. They have housing affordability index, and let me see here. I just opened up my spreadsheet. And most local counties, they have, I mean, anywhere from about 24, 26, 27, maybe 30 if you're lucky, 30% of buyers or households can afford the median price. And so, this is definitely for their metric. It's one of the lower ones. I have this graph that goes from the 90s through last quarter, and this is pretty low. During the great financial crisis, it's just slightly above where it was then. And so, I mean, it's a problem, but like I said, I mean, I don't need to beat the dead horse over this. We all know it is. That's why we're missing a lot of buyers. I think one of the things about affordability that people are surprised that I would maybe share a stat and say, we were missing 34% of the normal number of buyers last year. And that sounds like it's not that much, but I would say imagine losing 34% of your body weight or your income. And then we go, okay, that's actually a huge amount of the market to be missing. Very positive that 66% happened, and hopefully we bump up a little bit this year. But yeah, it's a glaring issue.
Yeah, and I know that from the real estate side, being directly involved in that and watching the lenders, they're experiencing that price drop. And some people, these times, these cycles in the market always knock a lot of people out of the market in these professions.
Yeah, I think everyone in real estate has been affected. And I mean, for those that are here that are standing, it's really a congratulations is in order to say, hey, you've made it. You've been hanging on. And normally we might start to get some relief with prices by this time, but it's been 2.5 years. And since sellers stepped back from the market, we haven't seen that relief coming in terms of either prices going down or a lot more listings flooding the market, which would help with that. So it's a unique thing, but yeah, for those that are in real estate, like, way to go. I mean, you're hanging on, finding ways to make it work. Not easy for anyone out there, but I find that today we have to work harder to even maintain the level of business that we had in the past, if that's possible. And so there's something very noble about that, just having to put our heads down and grind it out and make it happen.
Yeah, thank you. Cheryl asks for Chris, what about the credit reporting law? What if people opt out? Appfolio still reports to Experian, but at no cost to them.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure why somebody would opt out. In other words, it's a good thing for tenants if they pay their rent on time. If they don't pay their rent on time, it's not a bad thing because that's not going to get reported. But I'm just going to guess and say, look, if somebody absolutely wants to opt out, you're going to have to opt them out of that provision. Let me, while I'm got the floor here, Delia is asking if Assembly Bill 2801, that is the photography requirement for security deposits, does that apply to current tenants or only new tenants? Yeah, it's all tenants. So if you're starting, yeah, I'll have to look it up. Again, these are pretty new. We're still going over and talking. I think it takes effect in April. Mid-April, sometime in April. So yeah, anytime after that, you're going to have to provide these photos and make sure that you get those to the tenant to show, look, you broke the window. Here's a picture of it before you moved in. It wasn't broke. Here's a picture when you moved out. And here's a picture after I fixed it. If you're going to charge a tenant, you got to go through those steps.
Chris, really quick. It starts in April, but what if you've had the tenant for 10 years? You didn't take pictures at the beginning, you just take pictures at the end, there's a broken, broken window. Are they still gonna have that same requirement that you're supposed to have had pictures at the beginning? Or are they starting, or do you know whether they're starting, you can
Okay,
take
so-
pictures after?
My understanding is yes, you have to provide pictures, so you're gonna show at least the broken window. You know, there's another, I mean, this gets into some real gray areas. How do you take a picture of smell? Okay, we walk into these units and sometimes somebody's been smoking weed in there or cooking with curry, and the house is just like reeks. Well, I mean, it's the California Apartment Association did a little seminar. They did address this, and you're just going to have to make sure you have more than one person documenting. Yeah, here's the case. Right, it smelled like this, and so I guess trial lawyers do write a lot of these bills. So a lot of that we may have to go to court a few times to find out. How that's going to end up. Now, Steve Lanzi, my office manager, is also in this chat, and I'm reading. The bill would require tenancies to begin on or July 2025, a landlord to take photograph. Well, there you go. So I was wrong. It's going to apply to those who move in after July 1. Thank you, Steve. It would also require the beginning of April 1st, 21, the landlord to take photographs of the unit within a reasonable time, and so on. So there you go. That's why I have Steve. He's
Thank you,
top of
Steve.
the line. He's top of the line, and he's got a better memory than me. But it's a little bit like drinking out of a fire hose at this moment, trying to get all the provisions down and figure out which ones we're gonna, focus on and which ones come up often and so on.
Hey, Chris, really quick, there's another one from James. I'd love to hear your opinion first. Any recommendations for someone looking to move into real estate investing in 2025? Companies to get experience at, strategies or research? My current idea is just to look in the area. Current cheap single family homes under 100,000 get started with the first investment. What are
Yeah,
your thoughts?
well, I do a seminar on that. It's about a 2-hour seminar, where to buy your first investment. Here's a couple cautions. I mean, it's great. Look, the barrier of entry is much lower in a lower priced home, right? You can buy something for $200,000 or $300,000, but you got to watch out for fool's gold, because a lot of those properties that look good and even look like, they'll pencil out quite well. They're in areas that we consider unmanageable. And so I see a lot of first-time investors go out, buy something in a really tough part of town that I won't even manage, and most companies will not manage. And they can't keep a tenant, and when they try to get them out, it's 6 months of vacancy and it's all torn up. So you really want to, here's my summary answer. If you have a property you want to buy, call a couple property managers, ask them if they will manage that property for you before you buy it. Because if they're all saying no, that's going to tell you something really important, very important. So, will you manage it? How manageable is this property? What can I expect? What kind of tenant can I expect? Go out to the property, sit there. That's what I was looking at one in a part of town that I don't normally invest in here. And I've been out there 3 times, and I park my car and I sit there for like 30 minutes and I just watch what's going on. And as good as those numbers are, they're sweet, sweet numbers, but I'm not buying that property. I'm just not. It's nothing but 50% vacancy and 100% tear outs, and the beat goes on.
Another question from Sarish. Any thoughts on fireproofing homes? Yeah, Chris, this is probably directed at you.
Okay, fireproof and home walls. This is especially important in our rural properties. The local fire department wants 100 feet clearance. They come out and inspect our properties. You got to clear the grass, clear the brush. If you got a wood shake roof, probably want to replace that thing. First of all, it's probably 30 years old or more, because you haven't been able to put those on for a while. So put a nice tile roof on it, or one of these presidential fire retardant roofs that last 40 years. And that's really the main thing. Get everything cleared away. Make sure there's no trees and stuff hanging over the property. You kind of have to look at it and say, what if there's a fire, what's going to burn, what's burnable near my home, and get rid of it. Make sure that, you've got a good water supply, and be able to dial 911 on your phone.
Okay. She was also asking, when is the webinar regarding investments that you have?
I don't have one planned, but we will soon. What you do is shoot me an email, chris@californialandlord.com, chris@californialandlord.com. And we'll let you know when we're gonna do that. There it is. californialandlord.com.
Cool, thank you. Right, are there any other questions? Let's close up the roundup for this year, 2025. Thank you so much for coming, Ryan. Once again, thank you so much, Chris, and Dean as well. I will see you again next year.
Thank you, Joel and Mike.
Okay, see you later.